Welcome back. It's time for our second panel discussion of the night. This one is themed actions. In this panel, we're going to talk about the concrete actions that both individuals and companies or VCs could possibly put to use. Let's start this panel discussion the same way we did with the last one. So our panelists could shortly introduce themselves at first. Inka, would you like to start?
Yeah, more than happy to. Hi, everyone. My name is Inka Mero. I'm the founder and managing partner of Voima Ventures. We're a Nordic-Baltic deep tech fund investing into science-originated companies and growth startups aiming for global scale and have a big mission. Our mission is to solve big global problems by combining entrepreneurship, science, and capital.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks.
Nice to be here with you, Inka. My name is Jyri Engeström. I'm Finnish, but reside mostly in San Francisco, and also co-founder together with my partner Katarina Fake, and general partner of Yes VC, early stage venture fund, investing into companies connected with social movements.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you both of you here. Without further ado, let's start with the first question. What have you done or what has been done to improve diversity and inclusion in your organization? Current or previous ones?
So I can start within Voima Ventures. Obviously, I think I represent probably this very rare female founder managing partner status as in venture capital or private equity asset class. In this 100 billions of industry, only less than 2% is managed by funds created by women or women as founders. And in that respect, we do have diversity in the team in terms of our employees and so forth. But to be very transparent, the rest of our partners are actually male partners. So one big thing what we've been talking about and looking into is actually how can we build diversity and inclusion into our own portfolio. And we can talk about it later, but it's easier said than done. So let's come back to that topic later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think on our account, probably the major contribution to diversity and inclusion was what we didn't do, which was at the time, I was earlier working at a different fund, True Ventures, and considering, maybe I should do VC as a career. I wasn't originally planning on it. I thought I would just do a little bit of a stint in VC and then go back to being a company founder. And I had to make a decision about how to be a VC, whether to join an existing firm, essentially, or start something on my own. And I think in my case, obviously, we decided to start a new fund together with Katarina, who's also my life partner. So it's basically a family-run business. And for me, the question was, do I want to join a firm that, as the fourth male GP, or in the other case, I think as whatever, team member number 7 on the investing team of an all-male investing team. And so it didn't feel that represented the future anymore. And if you are a venture firm, you obviously want to align with where the puck's going rather than where it is right now, to misquote Wayne Gretzky. So I would count that as probably the most significant career decision, and also obviously it's path dependent. So everything we do now is sort of, as for you, the fact that, okay, you've got male partners, as I'm obviously a male partner at a venture firm, but founding female general partner and key person, or as I think still in that, at least the European docs, key man on a fund.
Key man. I'm a key man in our fund.
Right. So it's a thoroughly rotten business that is unbelievably, prejudiced and aggressively,
Inwards looking.
and misogynistic. And so it's a tough business already, but being a woman in VC is 100 times tougher. So respect to Inka for doing what,
Yeah, definitely.
being blazing a trail. And now we're going to see more female GPs like Katarina and Inka. And hopefully they will soon be the majority.
Right. Then kind of on the same topic, have you heard of any other organizations, like any success stories over there, how they have improved their gender diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I have plenty of stories. I think one great example is actually Unilever. I have a privilege to work in Fiskars board with Ritva Sotama, who is the general counsel and board, let's say, leadership team member in Unilever. And the kind of how you really move the needle in big scale is that you actually start to put certain diversity inclusion metrics into the kind of a balanced scorecards and targets of the leaders. And to be honest, you can start, obviously talking about the topic and measuring about the topic and all of this. But once you actually start to have pressure from the shareholders, that your public company shareholders or financial institutions are looking for diversity and inclusion, but also including this into kind of a day-to-day way to manage and measure how well the teams are performing, then the kind of a difference starts to happen. And it all starts from really, actually publishing the topics. And Unilever actually has done a great job in it. Then obviously, I think we heard here in the earlier panel already great stories, but I've been myself a founder in a female e-com startup where we only had women and gay men, so we were like really inclusive from the very beginning. But we failed. We did raise less money, and we raised that while being pregnant and giving birth to children and all of that. Some kind of horrible horror stories of fundraising and going to a meeting with a big belly and all of that. But still, it was a fantastic learning experience. So, but I always come back to this Unilever. I think they've done a great job there.
Jyri, would you like to continue on that? Any companies that come to mind who've done a good job?
Well, I remember Katarina early on invested in Etsy, which is a marketplace for crafts that's now a publicly listed company on the New York Stock Exchange. And Etsy originated from another online community, Craftsy, which was largely, as I remember, one venture capitalist put it at the time, a bunch of chicks knitting. And so you obviously are dealing with something that has a large customer base that is very female focused, right? The majority of Etsy customers were women, but a lot of the engineering team were guys, unsurprisingly, right? And Chad Dickerson, who at the time was Etsy's CTO and then later the CEO, Etsy's now run by another CEO, but Chad at the time actually was the CEO. I remember this part where I think they were looking for a new CFO. Maybe the company was already going public. I can't really remember at what time. And he said, let's look at women candidates for the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer position. And the search firm said, you mean, yeah, you can definitely bring out a few women candidates. We can, focus on it. He said, no, I meant only women candidates. And they said, we can't do that. And then he insisted, and lo and behold, because the argument was obviously, well, there really there isn't a deep enough pool of female qualified CFOs to lead a company that's about to go public on the New York Stock Exchange. And so there's often this assumption that they just don't exist until you actually do something radical, where Etsy has done many other things. They transformed their engineering team from majority guys to, I think, is it majority women now? I'm not sure what it is, but anyway, a tremendous shift through an, basically training, a boot camp, again, focused on taking in cohorts of women and then training them into engineers, and then hiring the best inside the company, and through that transforming the engineering team inside of the company. So there's a lot of ways that as a leader, regardless of whether you're female or male, you can transform a company if you insist. But it requires that you insist. You can't just say, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court judge in the United States, who recently passed, I think, one of the most powerful, she has a lot of very powerful quotes, but the most powerful one for me was when someone asked her, would you be satisfied if on the Supreme Court 50% were men and 50% were women? And I think she responded, her response was, I will be satisfied, or gender equality will, I consider to have happened when it'll be 100% female and nobody will take notice, right? And I'd add to that, and then keep it that way for 200 years. And then let's start talking about
Equality.
50-50, right? And so there's often this presumption, especially here in the Nordics, and we're now in Finland for the viewers who, if you don't know where we are, where equality is considered to be something that's 50-50. But then if you look at the historical situation, it may have been 90-10 or 100% 0% for the last 400 years, right? And so if you really look at it, as I'm a sociologist by training, I'd say, oh, well, let's keep it all 100% women for the next 400 years, and then let's call it 50-50, right? Then we'll be actually equal.
Those are excellent points, because I think as a leader, you need to start thinking very creatively and also just push the boundaries, like we heard the story of the CFO. The reality is that if you look like the historical successful IPOs and then you try to look for a CFO who has been on board, it's impossible to find a woman like that. So for me, a big eye-opener was that when we started to look for a trainee to our fund, and I had this illusion that actually many women will apply because we kind of promoted in social media. We have quite great, good follower base, and of course quite a lot of touch to the, let's say, younger generation in the universities, and we work with universities and we talk about female entrepreneurship and also women in VC. And as a percentage wise, make a guess, from 100 applicants, I think we got 120 applications. So how many female applicants were there to find a position as a trainee in our fund?
Say 30%?
Three.
3 out of 120.
Yeah.
So less than 3%.
Yeah, we were really lucky because the women then who applied were like really high, applicants, really super talented ladies, and we recruited one. But this is like that was a big eye opener for me, that okay, there's something too male in me, or there's something non-inclusive in our brand, or where it might seem too tough or something very difficult to approach, and this is something that has been, let's say, keeping me somehow up at night, that how could we make this more accessible, because I've never felt this to be a tough I've felt this to be a really tough job to be, and I failed a couple of times before when I've been trying to raise the fund, but those been great learning exercises and all of that. This is a very male-dominated country club and everything like that, but the work as such is fantastic, and it's super interesting, and you can learn so much from working in venture capital, even in a junior position, and maybe jump to entrepreneurship after that, and then come back, for example, what I did, and much more than in corporate finance or like in these, big consultancy businesses and so forth. And so we just started to do systematically. I started to, let's say, first I recruited one female trainee, and then I called my sister's daughter who's studying in Aalto, like, you gotta come. And then we started to kind of rotate this. And the thing is really that I think it can be a great eye opener for anyone, regardless of gender or background, to work in very different, let's say, positions in the tech and startup community, whether investor or as an entrepreneur. But in that respect, I think it's really great that we have something like inclusive, talking about these different aspects that what do you need to take into account. And we've then I started to look into our website, and I thought that, okay, we look like it's really nature and Viking or Kalevala kind of a brand, and that's just something that speaks to me. I've been kind of creating that's my bias. So kind of we need to it's really difficult to find that angle that which would speak to bigger audience.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely. Actually, this was supposed to be a audience question that we picked up from the sign up form, but I because it fits the moment, I think I could ask it now. But do you think? Well, I'll find the exact question. But do you think that in business environment, like the business environment still expects higher education or more experience from female candidates? Like you mentioned that the 3 women who applied, they were like very, very like extremely qualified and
Yeah,
so.
they weren't overqualified.
Yeah. Okay.
Compared to anyone else, but they were super good with their own ways.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
and I don't think over education is necessarily expected. But of course, let's say one thing which typically is missing from female CV, if I very openly talk about this, is that if I look for a team member in a startup, or we think about adding a co-founder or something, we try to do this with our science teams, is that particularly in commercial roles, people kind of are looking for to join on board. Very rarely younger women have leadership or, let's say, ownership role in product, sales, or P&L.
Yeah.
And this is what I always try to do, is like, regardless what you do, try to get that experience, because that gives you some tangible, concrete numbers on your performance.
Yeah.
And so in a way, regardless how different you are, and how humanistic or how, let's say, characteristic Barbie style person you would be, because it really doesn't matter. It's your choice. You can be who you like. But if you have like hard facts supporting your performance, that is a great way to show that you can kind of step up and take new roles.
Yeah.
And such opportunities typically exist in startups, in growth companies, not necessarily in very early stage companies where you kind of need to have that entrepreneurial skill to grow the team and grow the first steps, but companies that are growing. Those are typically the places where you can actually get such experience if you step up.
Yeah. Yeah.
True.
Well, then the next question is going to be, well, it's going to be a bit bigger, but what should be done in practice to form a more gender diverse future in the entrepreneurship and venture capital scene?
Ooh, you start.
Refuse to work for men. I think that's the beginning. You have to make a personal decision about who you work for. And even if you are leading a company, you probably bring on investors and other stakeholders, and so that's an easy one. Work for a woman.
I would say help one woman forward at a time. Like, give opportunities for women, connect women entrepreneur with someone who can help her, give a chance to women, or let's say more, let people all together give more chances. What I often say is that the opportunities that were given to me, I of course had to grab it and say that I'm going to do this. They were given by men. They were never given by women. And this is what I try to always tell my female colleagues, that somehow you need to have, I think, this moral obligation and passion and drive and interest to help other women.
Mm-hmm. One of the ways I think we've been discussing this with my partner Katarina is that, and we also see this when we were raising a venture fund. Venture funds, just like startup companies, have investors, right? In venture funds, they're called the limited partners, the LPs. And we wanted a diverse base of limited partners, investors in our fund. We looked for women investors, and as typically happens, like in all these other examples too, it proved bloody tough to find women LPs. There are plenty of rich women, but very few of them actually felt comfortable investing in something as risky as venture capital. And we, one idea is that every time as a VC you make an investment in a woman founder, allocate, I don't know, 10,000 of that, 50,000 of that as cash that woman founder can invest. Yeah, in another female founded company, but if they want to invest in a male founded company, fine. But just kind of egg them on a little bit to get on the cap table of companies that are not just their own company. Because this is one of the key ways in which, and part of the reason, and what you were saying about the lack of product ownership as you have these kind of career-wise tracks of paths of people, and you find this, like there's great research on this, at least in the US market, I've seen this, where it's true, you have this increase in, there's more women getting like greater leadership roles, more responsibility in companies in the US, except in product and P&L leadership roles, which are the crucial ones, right? And it's kind of the same thing if you think about it as investor, right? You want to be on the cap table of companies, you want to own their stock, right? And so, being able to basically provide opportunities for women to act as angel investors, to build the networks, which are, I think, the reason why, I'm pretty sure that women would need to be more qualified than men to have an equal chance at it, because they tend to get, particularly in the Nordics, cut out from the sauna, poker play, rapujuhlat, crayfish party, like everything, beginning with the language with which we talk. It's weird to have a key man who's not a man, right? Like nobody even thought that it would be thinkable that it wouldn't be a man, right?
Yeah.
And so all of this, results in this situation we have, right? And so to begin to chip at it, I think you have to start kind of like a zipper tactic from the LPs to the GPs to the founders to the employees, like at each level at the same time. And we've done progress on some levels, but right now it's still looking pretty bad, especially up at the very top, where the, kind of, if you look at the root of where all the money's coming from into the startup ecosystem.
Yeah, and I don't know if there exists the kind of that micro level data, like on the overall startup base and the roles where women are in the Nordics. We have more information on female founders and female CEOs, but I'm a big believer that once you either lead the sales, the revenue, or you lead the product, you actually start gaining certain kind of experience. I think those are typically the places in business where you have to make a lot of decisions, and then you learn to make decisions, and sometimes you make good or bad decisions. It doesn't really matter, but I think those are the best places to show then afterwards. Like then looking 25 years back, then you kind of think like, okay, I was so lucky that I ended up into certain startup where I actually started to lead the sales, and then I led the sales for 5 years, and that was a really good success. But that has really kind of paved my way in many respects.
Right. Thank
Yeah.
you. Then these days, these topics like diversity and inclusion are spoken about a lot more than before, at least. But there might be some people who are genuinely trying to do a good job to improve on these matters, but might be actually making the situation even worse, or at least not really bettering. So, what would you say would be the like usual pitfalls to avoid while taking actions regarding these things, and how can you avoid making those mistakes?
Great question.
Yeah, I think in terms of for example, we're as we invest into science-based startups, key, let's say, capability typically these startup founders have is that they have PhD in physics. So just certain macro and level numbers exist. How many women and men have studied physics. If I could go back in time machine, I would have studied physics and chemistry. Luckily, my mother suggested me to study different stuff. But anyway, here I am. But the thing in a way is that there are certain realities you can't just change, and if you would we would, for example, march in and say that you guys are going to have to do 50-50 on this, people might find it offending because they kind of know the realities in their field of specialty. But at the same time, the way I've found started to work with our portfolio, that first we started to measure ESG, in all levels. I think environmental topics are equally important and as diversity and the whole ESG matter. And then the next step was actually to go this through with the CEOs. And kind of what you can do as an investor is that you can actually support in the recruitment, because recruiting is super difficult for startups. There is such a resource scarcity in like top talented people, men or women. So in that respect, I think the kind of a concrete work you can do is that you raise the awareness and show the success and metrics, and you kind of create a common shared context that what is needed, and after that you start implementing. If we would just push these kind of there would be a counter clash or culture clash or some sort of a counter reaction, I think. But I don't have a good example on what to avoid then, maybe the thing that I would march into the room and say like, okay, now we're going to do this 50-50 target, or we're not going to fund you. It's not going to work like that.
Interesting. Yeah. I would say one thing is the ghettoization of anything related to women, which I think is a pitfall. And I'll give an example. So 10 years ago, TED, the conference, I remember they were starting a new conference, and they contacted my partner, Katarina, and asked her, would you be one of the speakers at TED, the new TED? And the new TED was TED Women. And they were creating a conference called TED Women. And she was to be one of the first speakers there. And I remember her response, because it really kind of, as 10 years ago, I think I've had a kind of school of hard knocks also in partnering with her on just, how, with my own biases and particularly growing up in Finland, which you kind of get indoctrinated into believing that, you're sort of more aware and more equal and all these than others, and then, not really aware of your own biases. I think it's, been a particularly difficult path. But her response, anyway, coming back to the story, her response was, I would be honored Chris, I think it was probably Chris Anderson who was inviting her at the time. But I have 3 conditions. One, half the audience should be men, half women, just, make it equal. All of the speakers should be female. And then thirdly, rename the conference TED.
Mm.
And the point here is, fuck you. You're justifying the fact that you will continue not inviting equal amounts of women speakers to the main event, because you're creating this less important event, which is where all of the women go.
And the logo is in pink.
So, and this
Classic.
you can see happening over and over again. It is one of the main ways in which institutions, organizations legitimize their continuing, basically misogynistic way of treating women by creating something that is a token that X women, whatever it is, the slush women or the whatever women, right? And then turning that into the little ghetto where all the women can go, while we continue with the real business over here. And you can see this in venture too. People often ask us, are we an impact fund? And, because we, tend to invest in companies that have some kind of a social mission. And, it's another ghetto, right? It's like, oh, you get to play in this little impact thing over here. So you're not actually generating the kinds of returns that real venture is creating, because, you invest in these companies that have some kind of idea that they're actually going to improve the world, right? And I think it's important to recognize that and challenge that, because obviously the data tends to speak, as we all know, the opposite, where in fact, when you do invest in diverse teams, you let women take ownership of products, companies, and venture funds, they actually tend to outperform the guys.
Thank you. Great examples.
Yeah. You both, you both are quite experienced and have quite a careers behind you, and have paid attention to these problems for a while now. But if you were to give a single piece of advice to an entrepreneur or a VC who is just starting to emphasize improving gender equality, what would that advice be?
Well, firstly, I think you can't look for the, let's say, investment or a CEO or a team that you used to. So somehow you need to break the boundaries of your thinking. And how do you break the boundaries is maybe talking to other investors who've done it before, or talking to basically CEOs who've made it and kind of succeeded in bringing more diversity. So there is some level of different thinking that is needed. So, and really it all starts from yourself. And then the second thing is that never these choices of investments or recruitments are done alone. So somehow you need to get the team to align and share that it's crucial, it's essential, it's important that firstly we bring gender, but also other diversity, and also really empower younger women in a similar manner that we empower younger men, even though their way of communication, for example, is different. I've been part of a recruiting, for example, 2 female CEOs to public companies, and I can say that their way of behaving and discussing in the interview processes and explaining their successes or failures and what should or shouldn't be done was very different to male candidates, and that kind of a very easily felt steered towards a bias that actually the male candidates were better. No, they were just more bullish. So I think somehow firstly, finding a right kind of assessment criteria is super important. You have to test people's values. How do you test the values? It's not about how bullish you are. It's actually something that you can only track back on hard situation of that person, and you can do reference calls, how that person has been behaving and all of that. And same applies to basically this historical background. I've banged my head so many times in situations where people have said that, well, your profile is great, but it's so different to your male peers. So, this is so risky, they feel, so it's not necessarily a risk, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And then when you're working on the investment and so forth, I think it's okay, again, like to challenge always the teams on their growth ambition and numbers and coach them on that one. And I think that's one area where women really need to improve. Talk numbers. And I pay special attention when I talk to my investors that I always talk about. I talk about values and our mission and everything, but I do talk about numbers and I talk about the business and what should be done concretely. And that's one area that somehow I think with particularly women-led startups, they're great pitchers and storytellers, but the numbers are often missing. And I think this is one area of just also to look into kind of that typically the numbers are there. So that might be something for investors to consider. Those probably, let's say, would be anyway, just maybe scattered thoughts, and be systematic about it. Have a checkpoint. Have we considered, diversity? Do we have enough variety of candidates? This is an all-male team. What are we going to do about it? We're going to have to do something about it. What are we going to do about it? So, and typically, of course, when you're writing the check, that's the place when the teams tend to listen. So that's the place to influence. And in that respect, I think it's really good that you discuss that we have like these diversity targets. And would you feel comfortable, or are you committed to this? And what do you think about it? So also test the teams who actually come to you and search for funding.
Yeah. That was a great answer.
Yeah, maybe just picking up on this point, I think it's perfectly normal to, if you are, I don't know, taking a job at a venture firm, does the VC issue a diversity rider with their term sheet? Most VCs don't, but it's perfectly normal to do that. Increasingly Valley VCs certainly are doing it. I haven't seen a single Nordic VC do that. Why not? You have to be unreasonable. Many people think those sort of insisting on things is unreasonable and difficult, and it might get you fired. And regardless of whether your gender, if you're male, female, or would rather not say, then you can, I think, and perhaps you should, especially if you're creating a career for yourself right now, take those points as something that is part of your career, right? Maybe you're the person who introduces that into your venture firm, even if you're the youngest, most junior person there. And you make a few investments, including a diversity rider in the term sheet, and see what happens. At worst, you might, end up, finding a job somewhere else, but that could happen regardless of that, right? At least, so taking these kinds of risks is really what it's about, because you're going to have to bang your head against the wall a lot. I don't know. I was just looking at our portfolio, and 2 of our top performing firms or investments, the startups are run by women. And I was thinking, well, how do we, I hadn't really even thought of that actually until, it was just sort of there always. And that seems normal, but, should that become more of a story? Should there be more, I think, it's oftentimes that you sort of need to remind these women to kind of bang their drum a little bit, whereas the guys are very quick at, beating their own chests. And maybe we should help them with that. So celebrating the successes also really important. And then maybe lastly, I mean, kind of like what you were saying there, we're going to have to, this is the most powerful movement in the world in our lifetimes. I'm convinced of it. Like climate change, all that, from humanity's perspective, is going to be only second to, the continuing empowerment of women in humanity, right? And so consider it. Like, do you want to be a part of that? And as an investor or founder, the growing economic power, the growing political power. Look at who's running the country here. You think that's going to be an isolated case? Probably not. It's going to continue, right? The reason we're seeing this kind of incredible political strife is partly because of these dynamics and just the demographics and the new generation coming up with these different values, like you were talking about the values. So which side of history do you want to be on? And if you're making investments and bets that are going to turn into something 10, 20 years from now, some of these bets we're making is going to take a long time for them to, actually return capital. Like, how do you align yourself better with that? So I think from a very longer term perspective, it would be incredibly dumb to not take these questions seriously and understand that they're not non-financial questions. They're number questions, ultimately, even though they don't seem like it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good note to end with. Like, which side of history do you want to be on, and the viewers as well. So very good points. Thank you. One last question, if you could just shortly answer. What advice would you give to anyone listening to this if they want to take actions for diversity and inclusion in their own lives? There might be people watching who are not, sort of a leadership position yet. So what could anybody do for this thing?
Pay attention to that. I'm sure that everyone encounters daily or weekly situations where unconscious bias is happening. Talk about it. Say that no, something happened. Let's try to change this. Help women. Make diversity a hard topic. So choose the side of the history where you are. I think we can, regardless of the position, we can all influence that. Start by looking at children. Where do you encourage your children, boys or girls? How do you teach about the world to them? I have 2 sons myself, and my sons, at least from the basic education at home, they can definitely do their home stuff. No one is going to serve them ever. That's how I look at the world.
That's awesome. Okay, well, yes, and maybe if you are a woman, speak up. If you are a guy, shut up.
Amen.
Yeah.
That was short but good.
I was in a meeting right before this, a pitch meeting, by the way, where a startup, a founding team, a female co-founder and a male co-founder were pitching. And that is the note I sent to them after the pitch as advice for their next pitch. I am not going to invest in that company, but perhaps, hopefully, someone else will if they heed that advice.
Great.
Yeah. That's a powerful piece of advice.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's time to start wrapping this panel up, but a huge thank you to both of you, Inka and Jyri. This was a really, really interesting conversation, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and thoughts. I think I personally learned a lot during the last 45 minutes.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and thank you to all of the other panelists as well, and also to Julia for for the keynote speech. It was really interesting to hear her thoughts and experiences as well on the matter.
And we also want to thank you all for participating. We really hope that you learned something new about diversity tonight, or at least that these conversations raised some thoughts for you. And unfortunately, due to the situation, we're not going to be able to host a face-to-face conversation here tonight as we had originally planned. But we do encourage you all to start learning more about this topic as ourselves as well. And one practical thing, if you would like to read more about these sort of matters, you can check out a data bank that Inclusive has gathered on their website at inclusive.org. They have really good material there for you to get to know more about these matters.
Yeah, other than that, let's keep up the good conversation and take action in our own surroundings. Thank you and have a good rest of the night.